What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the SPY, the Nasdaq, the QQQs, and the indices, break down what the charts are telling us, what you should be watching for the future, and why on earth the market might actually remain pretty choppy for the time being before getting a possible bounce by the end of the week. And before I break down why that is very possible from a technical standpoint and what the fundamentals are telling us as well, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, whether it's $1 or $100, it's up to you. You're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each valued at up to $3,000. And the best part is, any could be a free Tesla share. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 3 days, so make sure you check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So anyways, when we look at SPY, this thing's down about 0.22% for the day, pretty much chopped around for the majority of the day. We did actually retest the lower trend line of this potential, bear flag like setup that we actually have right here on the hourly. You can also see this on the daily. But the real question from this point is, what is the market going to do? Are we just going to tank from here? Are we going to push up? And in my opinion, it's actually very hard to tell, at least for the time being, because we did once again bounce off the 20 moving average, but we're still stuck between the 50 and the 200 moving averages again. The yellow line up top right here, and hopefully this is like easy enough for you guys to see. This yellow line up here is around this 399 level. This is where we have some very strong resistance, and we're stuck there. We're stuck below it. The red line is the 200 moving average, around $389.06 a share. And this is where SPY is actually stuck above. So we've been going back and forth for the past 8 days. This is about 8 days in a row. Pretty crazy stuff. Now, we do have a potential reversal candle for the daily chart, but I'm not too worried about what these candles tell us because all the time they may yield completely different results. Now, what could end up happening is we might get a retest of this trend line. We could drop down a little bit more, especially because the VIX is at a very important support. But once again, I do believe we're just going to continue to chop back and forth, and I don't really see too much happening. We might see this thing drop a little bit lower before we do see a potential bounce, but I'm not really seeing a whole lot going on with SPY until we get more data. The data I'm referring to is more on Thursday and Friday. We do have some mortgage data coming out for Wednesday, but it isn't really too significant. However, for Thursday, we actually have some GDP data and also initial jobless claims, which is going to be very significant. This will move the market, in my opinion. And then finally, on Friday, we also have PCE coming out. That's going to be huge. It will affect how the entire market moves because this tends to be the Fed's preferred inflationary measure. And if this thing is hot, once again, not going to be a good sign. But once again, I'm also prepared for manipulation at the same time because of the crazy options chain. Now, what's crazy about SPY is we saw another few 100,000 puts being bought for Friday. So once again, people are shorting the market very, very hard on Friday. We are also seeing some more calls being bought, but the majority of them are actually puts. We have about 600,000 calls expiring, almost 700,000 of them. And we have this is about 1.7 plus million puts expiring on Friday. We have a 2.5 put to call ratio with 395 being max pain. Now, if I were the market maker, I might try to squeeze a lot of the shorts. They might try to actually pump the markets up if we do get another drop. And we might actually see this reflect in the tech sector. I'm going to break down tech in a couple of minutes. But once again, we have to be prepared just in case. Looking at the overall most traded contracts, the Tesla, March 31st, $190 call was the number one traded contract alongside AMC. And once again, some Tesla puts, more Tesla calls, AMC calls, pretty interesting. And then we have Alibaba and then Apple calls as well. So all over the place, we're continuing to see more and more call buying for these specific dates. And that doesn't guarantee like anything, but it does actually tell me that some investors are anticipating some upside. I think for Tesla, it has some potential to actually bounce because we're getting very close to April and we know the end of the quarter is coming. And once again, that could be good for Tesla because they likely will give us a decent deliveries report, in my opinion, or at least the hype and the anticipation will be positive to start us off. Now for SPY, I am anticipating just lots of boring price action. It's probably just going to chop around more tomorrow, maybe drop a little bit more because of what this candle is looking like. It might retest this trend line, come all the way down to 394, 393 or so, and then try to bounce around there. But overall, I'm not really seeing too much for it. I think more action is going to be happening to the tech side. What's interesting about tech is the QQQ came down 0.53%. I told you all the zone I'm watching is 305, and that is where, very close to where it bounced at 304.77. Now, one thing I want to note is we have this gap up here. I don't know if we're going to get a green day and try to push up to fill this gap immediately, or if we're going to like come down a little bit first and then try to bounce a little afterwards. It's got to be one of those two most likely. But either way, I do see a tech bounce coming very, very soon. I'm just not as confident about what's going to happen by Friday or even like Thursday because of the data that's coming out. The data could really change everything. We have GDP data and also inflationary data. But besides that, if we just ignore the data and I just look at this from a technical standpoint, it looks to me like the Nasdaq had some very strong selling pressure around here, especially during this point when we opened up. But as it actually dropped, we ended up holding the support better and better. And this is why the MACD was getting tighter. The PPO started to actually show signs of strength, at least to some degree. So my best estimate would be either QQQ drops a little bit more, maybe retest this zone, or drops a tiny bit lower to like 302 or so, and then it tries to bounce, or it might just keep trying to go tomorrow. It's got to be one of those most likely. But either way, I am seeing the QQQ potentially bouncing very soon. Could happen as soon as tomorrow, maybe a little bit later. And if that's the case, it's likely going to be dictated by lots of tech out there. Now, NIO was hit with some very bullish news because of the fact that they are going to be building even more of the battery swap stations than they initially anticipated. And they also closed a very big deal with an energy company in Europe. So once again, we have a potential bullish triangle. I don't know if the market's going to drag it down a little bit if we do drop a little bit more, but as long as it holds like $9, it's going to be in a very good place, especially going right before April. If NIO, whether it drops or not, it doesn't really matter if it drops or not, but if it gives us a good deliveries report, it's likely going to just continue to fly if they do very well for the month of March. The VIX is telling us, however, the market could actually drop a little bit more. That's why I've been talking about the possibility of both SPY and QQQ dropping a little bit more before potentially bouncing, because the VIX is actually quite oversold. We're actually very close to key support around 20, very close to it. It doesn't have to be exact. We might see the VIX trying to bounce off of this, but it is looking a little bit weak at the same time. It might try to bounce and try to get to about 20 point something, maybe a little bit higher, and that might actually drag the market down a bit. But if it does reject somewhere around here, it could at the same time slow down. Now, looking at the VIX, we are now below the 50 moving average, which actually just dropped below it today. If this thing bounces, we might see the VIX try to get back to 20. If it rejects off like 20.5 or somewhere else like that, it could be actually making lower highs, and then it might actually end up coming down later on and breaking below 20, going back to like 18 or so. That's also very possible. That happened in the past before. We saw this thing hit 18. So it is a possibility, but I am anticipating the VIX will try to bounce first, and then it might end up dropping down if it does end up dropping down. And if that's the case, it could be bullish for the market later on, maybe going into the end of the week, maybe a little bit later. Now, as far as Amazon goes, I just want to note that on the daily chart, we're overall kind of mixed. We have a wick at the bottom, so this does tell me we did see somewhat of a push near the end of the day. But on the hourly time frame, I want to note that, in my opinion, Amazon is looking pretty good. What's good about Amazon is the fact that I think I saw a bullish divergence earlier today. Let me see if I can find it again. There is a possible bullish divergence right here. If you look at the low at 95, the RSI was at like the 44 area. Now the RSI is even lower than that. We're actually around 40 right now. RSI is going down and down and down and down and down, but the price right now is actually making a higher low, which tells me we might see Amazon try to bounce either like very early, maybe tomorrow, maybe later during the week. We might see a bounce on Amazon trying to get back to like 100. I would say by Friday. So if anything, I would just give it some time, but I do believe by Friday we might see Amazon bounce and try to get back to like 100. For Tesla, I'm not too sure if it's going to try to bounce from here or if this thing is going to, try to drop a little bit more to fill the gap and then bounce. It's got to be one of those two most likely. We do have a possible bullish divergence that's developing right now, and it's looking to me like Tesla is going to try to bounce very soon, especially because we're getting very close to the deliveries report. I think there's going to be a lot of hype associated with it, as many analysts are coming out and just turning very bullish. So it's either going to drop more and then try to bounce, or it might just straight up push up from here. By the time we get to Friday, that's very, very possible, and it might actually get close to either 190. And if it breaks 190, it could even fly to like 200 again. Very possible on Tesla. I know people are talking about how bearish Tesla's looking since it broke out of this like wedge. That is a possibility, sure, but you also have to account for the hype and the news that also plays a big role. For NVIDIA held 264. That's the very important thing. We actually closed above 264 and managed to hold that. Now, we did drop, and my key target was around this 159 to like 160 area. We actually bounced off 158. NVIDIA did drop and bounce. And I think we have a gap up here. I think there's a gap up here around this like 265 area. It might try to push up to fill that gap either tomorrow, or it might get dragged down with the market first and then push up later on. But I believe if we do get a tech rally, if the tech comes back and we start to see more call buying, we could see NVIDIA try to get back to 270. It's very possible. I would bet by maybe like Friday, depending on where we drop to, if we do drop more and then bounce or not. But I do believe it's very possible. Now, for Apple, I want to note that Apple had another interesting day. I told you all if Apple broke our support around this 157.5 area, it would likely fall to the 155 zone. We bounced off 155.98. This is where we got our very technical bounce. And what's good about that is now it actually closed above 157.65. So that's once again a good sign for Apple, holding up quite nicely. And in my opinion, it might actually try to hold these levels. I don't really see it rallying way too hard. I do think Apple might try to just chop around this like 157 to 160 zone. From a Fibonacci standpoint, we could see we bounced very close to where our 0.5 retracement was, 155. That's the target I had. We actually bounced to like 155.98. So right now, what I'm seeing for Apple is if it can hold this 157.5 area, if it just holds that for tomorrow, there's a good chance it might try to make its way slowly back to 160 or very close to that. But I do believe we've been in a topping process and we're likely going to continue to be in one. I do think it might try to make an attempt to come back to these like higher levels, but I don't really see it breaking out as of right now. That will depend on PCE and also on the data that comes out affecting the GDP. That will play a big role as well. But for the time being, I just want to stand by what I'm saying, and that is Apple will most likely try to fight to hold 157.5. And if it does hold it, it has the potential to try to push up to these levels again. As far as Google goes, or Alphabet, whatever you want to call it, this is looking pretty okay so far. Overall, our MACD is telling us that this thing has been on a decline, but overall it's gaining some momentum. It's actually losing the bearish momentum to some degree and it's trying to hold this 100 support. If it actually holds this 100, I wouldn't be surprised if tech does get that like balance or rally I'm talking about, which I think is very likely by the end of the week. We might see Google try to get back to these higher levels. We might try to see it retest the 50 moving average, get to 104, 103. Very possible it's going to try that. And I do think Google has the potential to try to bounce from here. But once again, we have to hold 100 first. As long as we hold 100, it's very possible. If we come down and we fail at 100, it's not going to be pretty. For the IWM, or our notorious Russell 2000, right now, there's not a whole lot going on. It's just very, very choppy. I expect it to just continue to remain like this. It is actually showing some weakness right here on our MACD. I'm seeing signs that it might come down a little bit to fill this gap, and then it might try to bounce after that. Overall, it's just pretty much choppy. Not a whole lot is going on. Meta, in my opinion, has some bullish potential because you have to remember that Meta got a bounce off 199 once and also a bounce off, it was about like 197 or so. So we're very close to where our previous support was. Now, one thing that's bearish about Meta is you could say that this is looking like an inverted cup and handle. So maybe this is like our cup and we're about to form like a handle and then drop. That's very possible. But before the drop comes, I think because Meta held this and it actually closed above 200, that's a good sign. There's a good chance Meta is going to try to fly all the way back to at least 203, maybe get as high as 204 point something. This 203 to 204 zone, I think Meta is going to try to retest it. And I believe this thing has the potential to try to push up and approach that level over the next couple of days. For the dollar is now actually still just consolidating, not really doing too much. I was thinking the dollar would actually push up a little bit more today. It actually is just trading sideways again, not really doing a whole lot. We'll have to wait and see how this looks. It could be trying to form a double bottom. That is a possibility. Or it could be establishing a higher low around this 102.5 zone, somewhere around there. If that's the case, I'd like to see how it reacts to this. Really, I mean, it's still looking a little bit weak. So it's very mixed right now. But if it does establish a higher low, there's a chance it could start uptrending a little bit later. But until then, it just needs confirmation. Microsoft, in my opinion, it's holding up all right. It actually closed above 275. This is where my fib retracement was. I have to adjust this. But what's interesting about it is we came very close to the points 236. I believe that Microsoft might come down a little bit to try to bounce off this 272 area. And then we might see this thing just bounce and try to keep going and try to get close to like 280 after that. Because the overall daily candle is not looking too bad. It's just okay. Nice wick on the hammer. We also saw this thing trying to hold up. I think it could try to get to about 280. It is very possible, but it might come down first, just a little bit more to retest these low levels and then bounce later. That is still very possible. Finally, I'm going to talk about the 10-year. Probably just wrap up the video from there. I believe that the 10-year, it has this gap down here. I don't know if it's going to get another rejection of this like 36 level. We're very, very, very close to it. It might be forming a triple top here and it might come down to fill this gap. That would actually be aligned with what I'm saying. Like if this pushes up all the way up to this 36 level, that in turn would be a little bit bearish for the markets, telling me that the market might cool off a little bit more. But if it rejects off this very important rejection zone around 36.4-ish, around there, then this thing might come all the way back down and fill the gap. And if this thing comes down, that tends to be a little bit more bullish for the markets, right? So what this is telling me is, and I want to remind you all, I'm not really talking about the fundamental aspect of this. I'm not talking about like CPI and all these other factors. We're just ignoring them for the time being and just talking about what technicals are suggesting the most likely possibilities are. The most likely thing, in my opinion, is the market's going to continue to chop and we might see a little bit downside, a tiny bit more downside, but then we might see after that another rally, another push up in the markets, especially from the tech side. That is still very possible before Friday, in my opinion. Finally, for AMD, this thing is holding up okay. We actually held, I believe it was like 93, and we can actually look at what our very important fib levels are. If you look at this, we start our bottom from the 75.92 area. Our top is all the way around here. And what I'm essentially seeing is it's getting very close to the 0.382 retracement. I don't know if it's going to retest this and then try to get a bounce from there, or if it might try to bounce from here. Either way, I could see this thing actually making an attempt to try to push up from here. It's very possible, but it's going to depend once again on many different factors. But overall, it's still holding up all right. Nothing too horrible happened. I believe that we might see this thing try to push and get above 95, maybe retest 97.5 very soon. But besides that, that's basically what I have for this video. Thank you all so much for listening. Please remain calm, cool, and collected. And the last thing, just to remind you, on the daily chart on SPY, don't forget to watch the 15-200 moving averages. We're still below and above them. And I don't really know which direction we're ultimately going to end up breaking in. My guess would be the downside later on, maybe within a week or two. It may take a while, but later on we might see this thing break this important support. Until then, I expect us once again to continue chopping a bit on SPY, maybe seeing a little bit of a drop tomorrow, followed by a bit of a bounce. This will also depend on the overall market. I also think tech will be what we should be watching for the later days of this week, because tech might try to make a small comeback. Anyways, thank you for listening. I do apologize if I made this video a little bit too long, but I just want the best for all of you. Thank you. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of the day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. The market to the moon because the long-term future is still incredibly bright, and peace out.